Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member Selkirk, Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And that has to be the worst speech ever by the member from Winnipeg North. I tell you, that was tough to listen to, completely irrelevant. And of course it's going to be irrelevant because he's spreading misinformation. He's making use of, the state broadcaster to push out the Liberal narrative without any evidence in it. We know that he doesn't want to talk about how the Conservatives actually increased the number of border guards by 26%, and we armed them so they could do their job better. We took away from the back room and put it, less tail and more tooth. That's what we did as government, making sure that they were armed, equipped, and our borders were more secure. We also know that he doesn't want to talk, Madam Speaker, about what the motion is actually about, how fentanyl use and illegal illicit drugs in this country continue to increase, Madam Speaker. Why won't he talk about how under their government that we've witnessed 22 Canadians dying every day because of fentanyl overdoses in this country?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, it's because I ran out of time. If I would have been provided more time, I would have been able to talk in terms of regards to the serious nature of the fentanyl problems that are in Canada. And it's more than just one level of government that's responsible. That's why you'll find that across the country, different provinces have different levels of issues and severity. And all provinces and the federal government need to work together. It's not appropriate to say that it's all Ottawa's fault, but the member likes to do that because at the end of the day, that's all they're focused on. It's just criticizing the federal government, even using misinformation, just like the member just said. There was a cut from the Conservatives. In 2011 and 12, 14,833 Border Control officers. 2015-16, 13,774. That's a cut. You can say whatever the members in the Conservative Party want to say, Madam Speaker. That is a real cut. You cannot change history. Stick with the facts. The member would be better off as opposed to the false narrative that the Conservatives try to express both inside the House and outside the House. Shame on them.
Yes,
thank you, Madam Speaker. It's interesting how sensitive the Conservatives are on this particular issue of the word traitor. I think it might be fair to say that many within a Canadian community would see that the Conservatives are attempting to be a puppet for Donald Trump in terms of wanting to raise issues that are ultimately to the detriment of any potential trade discussions that take place. After all, they like to amplify, Madam Speaker, issues in many cases that are nowhere near as severe as they try to portray. Like, for example, they're talking about fentanyl. Well, do we realize, Madam Speaker, thinking in terms of fentanyl going into the United States, it's less than 0.2% that actually comes from Canada going into the United States. Now, anyone listening to the debate this morning coming from the Conservatives, you would think that there's this huge, huge problem with fentanyl going into the States. A lot more than 0.2%. Madam Speaker, if the Conservatives want to talk from their seats, both inside the chamber and outside the chamber, and try to give the false narrative that there's fentanyl flooding the United States coming from Canada, that's just not true. And it doesn't help in terms of any sort of negotiations that are taking place because it portrays a false narrative. It's the same issue in terms of migrants. Less than 1% of migrants, illegal migrants, if I can put it that way, Madam Speaker, come from Canada going into the United States. But you listen to the Conservatives, and you would think that Canada is the problem for migrants going into the United States, Madam Speaker. The Conservatives are not being kind to Canada's negotiators when they amplify misinformation. I had the opportunity to meet with Sarah and some of our commissioners, Madam Speaker, trade commissioners, just in the last week, as we had a fantastic trade mission to Philippines. In fact, Madam Speaker, we've now begun exploratory discussions about a potential future trade agreement with the Philippines. We had the largest ever trade mission in the Philippines, Madam Speaker, and President Marcos had indicated that it might have been the largest in decades in the Philippines of any country. We should be talking about trade in a positive way, encouraging the government of Canada and other governments to look at Canada as a country that has the ability to be able to trade. And our negotiators are the best in the world. And when we hear Conservatives, Madam Speaker, standing inside the chamber, whether it's voting against the Canada-Ukraine trade agreement or espousing a false narrative, that does not help our negotiators. And that's why what the Conservatives are doing thus far this morning is nothing more than just puppeting Donald Trump and Donald Trump expressing concerns about border controls. Yes, there is a need for us to monitor and do our job and play an important role in beefing up where we can our Canada-U.S. border. And we take that seriously, Madam Speaker. Our actions have clearly shown that. You know, we hear numbers. Let me tell you a number when it comes to Conservatives and the misinformation. Let me give a fact. If we take a look at 2011-2012 federal budget, the current leader of the Conservative Party in Cabinet sat around the Cabinet table. This is the number of border control officers we had: 14,833 full-time equivalents, Madam Speaker. That's when the leader of the Conservative Party was sitting around the Cabinet table. In 2015-16, 4 years later, Madam Speaker, there were 13,774 full-time equivalents. That is a drop of over 1,000 full-time positions, Madam Speaker. They can say whatever it is that they want, but the bottom line, Madam Speaker, is this leader of the Conservative Party, when he sat around the Cabinet table, saw one of the most significant cuts to Canada border controls in the history of Canada. And now he wants to come out and say, well, look, we are going to have a healthier border control agency. Really? If there was no change in government, Madam Speaker, the cuts would have continued. In fact, according to their projections, there would have been an additional loss of 371 jobs by 2017-2018 if the leader of the Conservative Party would have been allowed to stay around the Cabinet table with Stephen Harper, Madam Speaker. So the reality is there was no sense of urgency, no commitment to protecting our borders, Madam Speaker, not under the Conservative Party. Why should we believe them today when in fact they go around saying we're going to cut? And what? They're not going to cut this area? They're going to actually give more? Really? Have I got a car to sell them, Madam Speaker? At the end of the day, you know, you cannot trust the Conservative hidden agenda. And I call it a hidden agenda, Madam Speaker, because they're not honest with Canadians. And when Canadians see the reality of a Conservative administration 10 years from now, hopefully, Madam Speaker, they'll see that they're true to the far right. The far right is what drives the Conservative Party today. Do not kid yourself. Many people thought the Reformers were far right. Well, I can tell you that this leader is genuinely as far right as they come, Madam Speaker. So when they talk about their fancy slogans, and all of them will talk about it, every one of them, because as I say, they get gold stars every time they repeat the Conservative slogans and bumper stickers, Madam Speaker. We know that. So that's what they're going to talk about, but they're cuts. It's not giving more, it's cuts. And that's what's going to happen with border control. Let's hear the leader of the Conservative Party actually stand in this place and say, you know, we are going to actually increase, as we did, Madam Speaker. Not only did we restore the cuts that Stephen Harper and the current leader of the Conservative Party put in place, we actually restored them and added several hundred more new positions, Madam Speaker. Why? Because, in fact, we recognize the need that's there, that's real. We understand that there is a sensitivity in regards to what takes place on the border, both ways, coming from the United States into Canada and vice versa, Madam Speaker. And we have seen impressive results, very impressive results. You know, in January 2022 to December 2023, CBSA actually had over 37,000 seizures of guns and drugs, Madam Speaker. That's some 7,000 firearms, illegal firearms, entering the country, Madam Speaker. Where the Conservatives turn their heads and neglect the border controls, this is a government that actually ensures that our border control agents have the resources and staffing that's necessary in order to make a positive difference, Madam Speaker. You know, it's interesting in terms of why it is that the Conservative Party wanted to talk about this specific issue, when in fact history will show that they have done such a poor job at protecting Canadians' interests. And that is the bottom line, Madam Speaker. This is a government that has recognized the importance of our border. We're talking billions of dollars every day of two-way trade that goes through the Canada-US border. Tens of thousands of people in different regions of our country that cross the border every day, Madam Speaker. It is a border in which we all have a vested interest in, Madam Speaker. And as a government, we have recognized that, going back to our first day in office, in looking at ways in which we can restore many of the cuts that the Conservatives have put in place, because we know that Canadians and Americans need to have confidence in our borders, because Canada is absolutely dependent on having that free flow of materials and supplies and services and products, Madam Speaker. That is critical to our economy, as it is critical to many American states and the entire United States, Madam Speaker. It's not a one-way thing that Canada is the only benefactor. Both Canada and the United States benefits by the traffic flows that take place between Canada and the United States. I only wish that the Conservative Party of Canada would recognize that fact, Madam Speaker. I only wish that the Conservative Party would have actually invested in our border controls, in protecting Canada's interest. But rather what we see is a leader of the Conservative Party that's dictated to his caucus, this is what you need to say, even if it's not true. You still need to say it, Madam Speaker. Why? Because the leader of the Conservative Party dictates it. Some members laugh at it. Well, Madam Speaker, it is true. Let's look in terms of national news that came from, that was reported about the leader of the Conservative Party. And the interesting thing about this story, Madam Speaker, is this is Conservatives, members. Think about it, members from the Conservative Party, what they are saying about the leader of their Conservative Party today. And this was made national news just, I believe, last week or 10 days ago or whatever it was. Actually, there should be a date on this, on November the 20th. Madam Speaker. Here's, and I quote, after 2 years of can't say the name, after 2 years of the leader of the Conservative Party as their leader, many Conservative MPs say they are much less free, that's much less free, now than they were before his arrival, Madam Speaker. Imagine that. The leader that goes around promising Canadians, we're going to have freedom. Yet, the Conservative members of Parliament are much less free, Madam Speaker. That's not me saying it. That's Conservatives that are saying it. Well, they're too scared to say their name to it, Madam Speaker. They're saying, name someone. Serious.
I just order. Yeah, I think a lot of people ate their Wheaties this morning. I just want to ask members to please wait. They'll have not 5, but 10 minutes of questions and comments. So there will be opportunities to ask those questions or make comments then. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has 6.5 minutes left.
Madam Speaker, members say, name someone. Well, let me tell you, look what happened to the member from Abbotsford. When the member from Abbotsford spoke out and criticized his leader, what happened to him?
The honourable member, I just indicated that there will be an opportunity to ask questions and comments. I would appreciate if she didn't scream across the room there. The honourable member for the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Order. Oh, my. What did people eat this morning? Yes, the clock has always stopped, so it just lengthens the day. The honourable member Parliamentary Secretary, 6 minutes and 10 seconds now.
I should get a bonus 15 seconds for that interruption, Madam Speaker. At the end of the day, again, this is what Conservatives are actually saying. The man who promised during his leadership run to make Canada the freest country in the world maintains tight control over actions of his caucus members. I don't have enough time to read it all, Madam Speaker, but there are some delights in here. Conservative MPs' words and actions are closely scrutinized by the Leader's Office. Partisanship is encouraged. Fraternizing with elected officials from other parties is a no-no. That means you don't come over here and you talk to me because you lose gold stars if you do that. Those who follow these rules are rewarded, Madam Speaker. Those who don't often have to suffer the consequences. Members were saying, well, give us a name. Look what happened to the member from Abbotsford. When he said, you remember when the leader of the Conservative Party said, well, I'm going to fire the Commissioner of the Bank of Canada. And a member from Abbotsford, much like every other member in the government bench, says, well, you need to recognize the Bank of Canada as arm's length, and you should kind of respect that fact. But not the leader of the Conservative Party says, no, I'm going to fire him. I don't like this guy. So what happens is he's now demoted. Where does he sit nowadays, or what does he do, Madam Speaker? So there's a message. Stick with what it is that the leader tells you, or you could be in trouble. Remember, you are actually followed somewhere in this article. It's amazing. Here's another good one, Madam Speaker. If the leader invents a new slogan, we know we'll have to use it. That's why, Madam Speaker, you see them pop up in every speech they give the slogans and the bumper stickers. Why? Because the leader loves it when they do that. You repeat the slogans, you get rewarded, said the Conservative source. You are celebrated in front of the entire caucus for being a good cheerleader. Wow, imagine that, Madam Speaker. Say those slogans and the bumper stickers, and you get applauded in the National Conservative Caucus. You know, it's truly, here's something really interesting. Sources told Radio Canada that Conservative Party staffers keep a close eye on MPs' activities. That means you're being stalked, by the way. Who's talking to reporters? Who's deviating from the party line? Who's fraternizing with MPs? That's why I warn you, don't talk to me. I don't mind if you talk to me. It's your leader that does. From other parties. Journalists have spotted party staffers taking notes, and sources say these activities are reported to the leader's office. Everybody is watched. What we say, what we do, what we talk to, we're told not to fraternize with MPs from other parties. Oh. And that's
not normal.
That's shameful.
Madam Speaker, that means when you stop and you think about it, you have the Conservative Party that want to echo what it is that they're being told, they're rewarded, and they're being stalked, Madam Speaker, to ensure that they stick to the script. And instead of what the leader of the Conservative Party goes around talking about freedom, within his own caucus,
Not free.
his own caucus members, at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has always said, even when we are in third-party status, that he wants and expects his members of Parliament to bring the issues to Ottawa that their constituents are talking about. And that's why you'll see budgets and throne speeches based on what Canadians are talking about in the communities, Madam Speaker. Because what we present here in Ottawa, and if you can give me a 2-minute warning, Madam Speaker, 2-minute warning? 1 minute, if you can give me a 1-minute warning, I'd appreciate it. If you look in terms of the actions that we have taken, Madam Speaker, it's a true reflection in regards to what it is that Canadians are thinking, because it's MPs bringing that to Ottawa. You get the absolute opposite from the Conservatives. You get the Conservatives telling their constituents what their leader is telling them to say, Madam Speaker.
Shame.
And we actually have proof of that. So sad, Madam Speaker. Less than a minute to go, Madam Speaker.
What I wanted to tell the member is he's not to hold up a paper that he's referencing, so he can talk from the paper, but I just want to make sure that the honourable knows that he can't use certain documents as props. So the honourable member has 1.5 minutes. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rookie mistake. What can I say? At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, if we take a look in terms of Canada's border, and we take a look in terms of the issue of trade, no government in the history of Canada has actually signed off on more trade agreements than this Prime Minister and this government. No government in the history of Canada. This government not only beefed up our border controls, we restored what the Conservatives had cut, and we added to it, Madam Speaker. On that note, I would move, seconded by the member from Markham-Unionville, that the question now be put. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Idea.
Thank you.